Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's Israel at War update. And as today we mark day 531 since October 7th of 2023, when Hamas launched its horrendous onslaught on the southern communities of Israel. Right now, we are in an escalatory situation where we're seeing the IDF ratchet up its various activities, both aerial as well as ground maneuvering. But before all that, let's introduce our panelists for today, and then we'll dive right into the latest developments. With us from Central Israel include Mr. Amir Oren, our TV7 editor at large. Next to him, a Brigadier General in Reserve, Dr. Amnon Sofrin, formerly the Mossad's Intelligence Directorate Chief, as well as a senior officer at the IDF Intelligence Directorate. And last but not least, from Washington, D.C., is Ms. Zineb Riboua, who is a research fellow as well as the manager of the Center for Peace and Security in the Middle East at Hudson Institute. It's great to see all of you. Mr. Oren will start focusing on the Gaza Strip. Go ahead.
So this is the third day since Israel decided to resume fighting and break the ceasefire, which was established exactly 2 months ago and was intended to go on for almost 84 days in 2 phases, but apparently collapsed. Now, Israel enjoys some freedom of maneuver because the ceasefire up north in Lebanon with Hezbollah is holding despite the Israeli strikes now and then against Hezbollah targets. So Israel is able to move forces to bolster its divisions and brigades around Gaza at will. First, Israel struck from the air. This was 2 days ago. But then, gradually, Israeli forces have entered the Gaza Strip in 2 basic places. One, in the middle of the strip, in the so-called Netzarim corridor, going all the way from the border towards the Mediterranean, only a few kilometers wide, but nevertheless a concentration of population there. And up north, having called on the population to move south, Israel has entered along the coast. And the idea is to force Hamas back into the negotiating table. Now, up to now, no Israeli casualty has been reported, neither among the troops nor among the 22 or 24 hostages still alive in Hamas captivity. But this, of course, is a very fluid situation.
War is fluid in essence, so absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Oren. Ms. Riboua, I'd like to ask you, since the UN or the United States during a UN Security Council session stated as follows: the blame for the resumption of hostilities lies solely with Hamas. This brutal terrorist organization has steadfastly refused every proposal and deadline they've been presented over the past few weeks, including a bridge proposal to extend the ceasefire beyond Ramadan and Passover to allow time to negotiate a framework for a permanent ceasefire. Hamas refused this offer, preferring still to hold hostages captive and hide amongst the people of Gaza, using them as human shields. It is the people of Gaza who will suffer further because of Hamas's disgrace for human life. Nonetheless, we do hear amongst many nations in the international community, including just over the past several hours, a meeting during French President Emmanuel Macron and King of Jordan, Abdullah II, coming out and saying, this hostilities need to stop immediately, focusing, however, on demanding those hostilities to stop on the Israeli side rather than focusing on the Islamist Hamas, which is responsible as the United States mentioned in its statement. What are we to take out of that, and how can we bridge those differences that have been quite prevalent since October 7th?
Yeah, well, thank you, first of all, Jonathan, for having me today. And I would say that the Trump administration sees the Hamas problem completely differently from the Biden administration, from many European countries. First of all, because from a Trump administration point of view, Hamas is not just a foreign policy issue, it's also a domestic issue. There have been many supporters of pro-Hamas organizations. They have caused trouble not just in Israel but also in the United States. And so I think the approach is here very different. The second thing is that I think the biggest player here is really the United States. And so other countries will obviously try to recalibrate their position, find a way to keep Hamas as a political entity alive, etc. But I think here the Trump administration is definitely going to push towards eliminating Hamas, not just as a military entity, which Israel has to deal with, but also as a political entity. Let's not also forget that China, I think last year, tried to maneuver because they have tried to get some sort of reconciliation between Hamas and other Palestinian factions so that they can dilute Hamas into any Palestinian group that emerges and that gets a hold of Gaza. But I think that the Trump administration is definitely going to counter these efforts precisely because of how they see it, not just as a foreign policy issue, but a domestic policy issue too.
Thank you, Ms. Riboa. General Sofrin, we heard during a press briefing at the U.S. State Department a question by an Al Jazeera journalist who asked the spokeswoman, Tammy Bruce, whether or not the outlines that were initially proposed by the Americans and subsequently rejected by Hamas were still on the table, to which she said they are still on the table. Does that indicate that there are ongoing negotiations or discussions, at least, to try and draw Hamas in as part of what Mr. Owen also mentioned, that those various military activities are in order to bring Hamas back to the table?
The IDF is not applying all its military capabilities in Gaza Strip. They are just pushing ahead a little bit, giving Hamas a taste of what can be applied more and more exclusively and more with a lot of strength, and giving them the sign that you better go into negotiations back, because otherwise we're going to apply the full pressure. Now, that's one side. On the other hand, the Hamas delegation was invited rapidly to get into Cairo to discuss the release of hostages and the renewal of negotiations. That means that everybody is interested that this round, it's not a war yet, it's a round between Israel and Hamas, will cease immediately or very soon. And therefore we go back to a negotiating table and try to get to what we call to some equations that will enable to release the people who are imprisoned in Gaza by Hamas, and in exchange, of course, to release people that are imprisoned in Israel, and by that to get to our what we call our goal. That means to bring the people back home. On the other hand, we don't want Hamas to stay in power, but that will be on phase B if this is going to be what we call the end game for the time being.
As the military philosopher Karl von Clausewitz always said, war is merely one tool or the extension of politics, and therefore this is being utilized as one of the options on the table. Mr. Owen, let's divert to Yemen, where U.S. Central Command announced, of course, that CENTCOM forces continue 24/7 operations against the Iran-backed Houthis. What can you tell us about that at this present time, with President Donald Trump also releasing a statement saying that the Iranians have diminished to a certain degree their support to the Houthis, but nonetheless, they're still supplying this Iranian proxy with munitions and other tools, and this has to stop immediately.
So let's start our look at Yemen from our own point of view, and that is the one missile launched at Israel overnight, 4 a.m. Israel time. The sirens were heard in many places, Jerusalem and Tel Aviv included. And this was done out of an abundance of caution because the missile itself was intercepted quite away from the Israeli coast. It wasn't made clear or public who exactly intercepted the missile. At times past, when the announcement did not specify who was the interceptor, it wasn't necessarily Israel, but rather American assets. So perhaps this is also the case here. It will be made clear later. Now, why are Israelis being asked to come out of the beds and go into shelters or safe rooms? This is not because of the Houthi missile, but rather because of the debris that the interceptor missile, once it hits the incoming threat, can spread over Israeli territory. So rather than go outside to watch the intercept in the skies above, it is safe to stay home and not get hurt by the debris. There was also another such alert when 3 rockets were launched out of Gaza. Apparently, Hamas either saved some for such an eventuality as the resumption of hostilities, or perhaps they were homemade during the ceasefire. Again, no one was hurt in Israel. 2 of the rockets apparently fell inside the strip. One, or rather, 2 of them fell in open areas in Israel. The third one was intercepted. Now, as for the American action against the Houthis and the warning to Iran, apparently the trend is for lessening Iranian support, and President Trump did not give any deadline when he announced his ultimatum, and the administration spokespeople too, in addition to the president, indicated that if the Iranian support stops altogether, there will be no American action against Iran proper.
Indeed. Well, with regard to the interception, of course, there's a difference between a mission kill and a projectile kill. And there are various considerations, as you mentioned, with regard to the debris, which has still a certain trajectory and a velocity that may impact certain civilian communities. And therefore, there is a necessity for the communities in Israel to seek shelter, and not only in Israel. And therefore, when we wrote for TV7 Israel News, the sentence with regard to who intercepted, it is namely the Israeli Air Force Task Force for Air and Missile Defense, commanded by no other than Brigadier General in Reserve Doron Gavish, who is in charge, of course, of a regional architecture of air and missile defenses, which is under the auspice of the United States Central Command, which is, of course, conducting all those activities, not only with its Israeli ally, but also with air partners throughout the region. Now, Ms. Riboua, when we're talking particularly about Yemen, the United States is very vigorous in its approach, very focused and very intelligence driven in eradicating the Houthi capabilities. It seems like the fracture between the various tribes has not yet emerged, but nonetheless, the are indications that the various tribes that pledged allegiance to Abd al-Malik al-Houthi are not necessarily as eager to confront the Americans as the Houthis are themselves.
Yeah, well, actually, the good news is that I spoke to a Yemeni researcher yesterday, and she told me that she was listening and talking to a lot of not just diaspora people, but Yemenis in Yemen, actually welcoming what the Trump administration is doing against the Houthis. They were always waiting for something to emerge so that the Houthis can be weakened, so that they can proceed with either consolidating their group and forming a political entity that can overthrow them, etc. And I think Saudi Arabia is also involved very much in that. Um, so I think of course we're not seeing the fracture in public. Let's not forget a lot of these people, they're going to be targeted, harassed. The Houthis are very aggressive towards anyone who criticizes them. So I think there is some light in that. What I would like actually to highlight, based on what you said, is that the biggest problem that I see coming here is that the Houthis have not just been weaponized by Iran; they're also being recognized by Russia as a good proxy that targets Western ships that can make it hard for Europeans, for others, so that they can be distracted by what is happening in the Red Sea. Let's not forget that a lot of the shipments, the millions of dollars that Westerners are losing in the Red Sea, are primarily coming from Europeans. And so for Russia, this is a critical and a strategic asset. Of course, as you've seen, the moment the Trump administration ordered the strikes, etc., one of the first things Lavrov did was to call Rubio and ask him to stop. So I think this is a very important factor that is going to shape, I think, the trajectory of the Houthi issue in the upcoming months.
2 points. One, U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, during an exclusive interview with Fox News, did highlight that the focus of the American operation is on preventing the frustration of maritime shipping in the Red Sea rather than the domestic developments in Yemen, which are, of course, in the course of the past several weeks at least, intensifying, particularly between the internationally recognized government or the council there of Yemen, which is fighting or there are some hostilities at least between them and the Iran-backed Houthis, which dominate the terrorist organization Ansar Allah. A second point that I'd like to make is that on March 3rd, when the United States designated the terrorist organization Ansar Allah as a foreign terrorist organization under the State Department. It also mentioned, as you noted quite correctly, that the Houthis, before launching an attack on an American vessel, let a Chinese vessel free, just to go through the strategic Strait of Bab el Mandeb, indicating that indeed we're talking here about a tool of the so-called Axis that is closely collaborating between Iran, Russia, China, potentially also North Korea and others. So we know where they are in the geostrategic landscape and how they are differentiating between one group to another. Now, General Sofrin, to what degree do the latest developments also in the just across the Strait of Bab el Mandeb, Somalia and Sudan and other countries in the Horn of Africa look at this at a time when the hostilities there are seemingly intensifying, at a time when the Americans are currently dealing with the Houthis proper?
I think that we have to look at this issue on 3 points of view. The first one is the fact that it has on the other side of what we call the Bab el Mandeb Strait, or the Red Sea, or the western shore of the Red Sea, meaning Sudan and all the other countries that are surrounding. Everybody is looking at what the Houthis are doing, and they say we can do the same. Now, bear in mind that Russia is now rebuilding or began building its new naval port in the area of Port Sudan that will give it access into the Red Sea, something that they never had before, at least not direct access like just they're going to have now. And this is going to affect what happens on vessels that are moving along this Red Sea, trying to get either to Suez Canal or to Eilat and Aqaba ports. That's the second issue. The third issue is all these pirates that are naval pirates that are now located in Somalia, and they look at the Houthis and they say, we are taking advantage of that because many ships are now surrounding Africa through the horn of what we call the Good Hope, and trying to get to the Mediterranean from the other side, avoiding to go through the Red Sea because of the Houthi threat, and therefore that they are exposed to attacks coming out from the Somali shore. And that makes it more complex. And of course, they know how to face it because they experienced that before. But nevertheless, this is a complicated issue because it affects everybody on the surrounding, and everybody looking at the Houthis. They say even though the Houthis are being attacked by the Americans and suffering a lot of bombing and so on, they still go on launching rockets, missiles, whatever, not only to the Americans, vessels that are moving along the Red Sea, but also to Israel. That means that they are not being down on their knees, as the Americans are hoping, and only by air bombing, it won't help, and the Houthis will go on fighting. They're stubborn, they have their ideology, and they go on fighting for a long time, and it takes a lot of that, a lot more of that, to take them down on their knees and to say, okay, please stop what you're doing.
Indeed. Well, Task Force 151, which is a U.S.-led task force in the Gulf of Aden, is still operational and working, of course, tirelessly to frustrate the piracy from Puntland in Somalia, something that the Russians and the Chinese are also part of, ironically, but nonetheless are less keen of being proactive in their participation on the strong power perspective. But we don't have very much time left, and still one important topic to discuss, and that is an ultimatum that was given in the latter, just unveiled in the past 24 hours in a report. Mr. Oren, this ultimatum is for 2 months from the delivery of the letter. And what can you tell us about that?
Well, if I may, just because you mentioned the African shore, there is concern in pro-Western or American-supported countries in Africa because of a report broadcast on NBC News the other night regarding the plans in the Trump administration, a cost-cutting spree to fold AFRICOM, the Africa Command, back into EUCOM, the European Command, and perhaps give up the position of Supreme Allied Commander Europe, of course, traditionally held by Americans since the very first commanding general, Dwight Eisenhower, and let a European command it, perhaps as the first step towards withdrawing from the military alliance in NATO. That would mean that one general sitting in Stuttgart, Germany, will oversee Africa too, and will have less of an attention span to what is happening in the Horn of Africa. And by the way, Somaliland was mentioned as one possible destination for the Palestinians willing to leave Gaza. But if these people are supporters of Hamas and they are going to be there on the coast of Africa, it won't be a very good omen.
Very dramatic words indeed. Ms. Riboua, in 1 minute, what can you tell us about the Iranian file?
What I can tell you is that I think there's a lot of discussions in Washington. There are of course restraints to think that it's possible to get a nuclear Iran deal. It's possible to go around and find a certain accommodation with Iran, etc. But at the end of the day, Trump knows the Iranians very well. And you can see that from his tweets. He's going to get much more much more aggressive on that because of the Houthi issue, because of all the proxies they've been weaponizing, and I think Rubio is trying to signal a lot of that. So I think we need to wait and see. I've heard also that a lot of people want Iran to be some sort of Libya when it comes to nuclear capabilities, etc. Maybe giving it up, reach that sort of accommodation. So what I would say, yeah, it's really to wait and see. But I would like to just go back to the Russia, Iran, China axis. I think that folding AFRICOM under the subdivision of EUCOM is not a bad idea for the simple reason that Russia is going directly in choke points in the Sahel. It's going to the Mediterranean Sea. It's going to choke points in the Red Sea, which are part of NATO's southern neighborhoods. And Europeans have not paid attention to that enough. And I think this should be incorporated in a larger NATO South strategy, which I think Giorgia Meloni pointed out too, and I think this is what the administration is receiving and is pushing for. The other thing is that I hope that the Trump administration will do a further investigation into Niger because they had to let go of 100 million military airbase, and it's really mainly because of Iranian and Russian disinformation and asymmetric warfare. So in general, I think that the Russia, China, Iran axis is only growing, and that the Trump administration has difficult and a lot of challenges ahead.
General Soflin, 45 seconds, no second more. I apologize. Go ahead.
I think when Mr. Trump says 2 months, it doesn't really mean 2 months. Just remember that he told Hamas that if you won't release the hostages until Saturday, we're going to open up the gates of hell, and nothing happened. So 2 months is just to signal that we're willing to go and advance very quickly. But nevertheless, it doesn't really mean that after 2 months they're going to attack or do something else.
Well, I'm not sure I would recommend the Iranians test that theory, but nonetheless, I'd like to immediately thank General Soflin, Ms. Riboa, and Mr. Oren for all of your valuable insights, and I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next update from here in Jerusalem. Shalom. TV7 Israel invites you to watch and hear some of the most knowledgeable experts, most of whom partook in creating policies shaping this region today. Join us for Jerusalem Studio.